The entire executive floor was decorated with blue and silver balloons, proudly showcasing our corporate branding like a victory celebration. Inside the main conference room, a massive sheet cake displayed 500% growth, written in dark blue icing across the center. 40 senior executives and managers were clapping, smiling, and offering a standing ovation as I walked into the room. Achieving 500% revenue growth in 18 months during an economic downturn was an extraordinary accomplishment. I stood near the conference table, taking a quiet breath and thinking this exact moment was when 4 years of relentless effort would finally be acknowledged. For 4 long years, I had endured 12-hour workdays, missed family dinners, canceled annual vacations, and even worked through double pneumonia during the previous winter to ensure our targets were exceeded. My chief executive officer, Gerald Holloway, walked up beside me, wrapped his arm around my shoulders, and gave a firm squeeze. He wore a proud paternal smile that I had worked tirelessly to earn ever since I joined the organization. He declared to the packed room that my senior directorial leadership was absolutely outstanding, encouraging everyone to give another round of applause for the growth our department had delivered. My team looked back at me with respect and validation, confident that they had backed the right leader. Gerald raised his hand for quiet, shifting into his formal announcement posture, the tone he reserved for quarterly dividend distributions or major structural realignments. He proclaimed that today marked a historic turning point for the enterprise, and that to maintain such momentum, the firm required fresh executive leadership to navigate the next expansion phase. I nodded in agreement, fully anticipating that he was building up to the announcement of my long-overdue promotion to Executive Vice President of Growth, a title he had dangled in front of my desk for 18 months. Then the heavy mahogany conference room doors swung open, and in walked a young man in his early 20s wearing an Italian designer suit, accompanied by an expensive haircut. Gerald's smile broadened dramatically as he introduced his 24-year-old son, Brandon Holloway, announcing that Brandon would be assuming the position of Vice President of Growth effective immediately. The sudden silence in that conference room was suffocating, as though all the oxygen had been extracted in a single second. Brandon walked directly toward me with his hand extended, casually remarking that his father had spoken highly of my work and that I had built a wonderful foundation for him to build upon. I stared at his groomed hand for a fleeting moment, realizing that in his eyes, my 4 years of intense dedication were merely raw concrete poured so that an unearned heir could construct his corner office on top. I reached out, shook the young man's hand warmly, smiled professionally, and offered my congratulations. What nobody in that room realized was that 5 hours earlier, before setting foot inside the building, I had dispatched encrypted lunch invitations to the chief executive officers of our 5 largest enterprise accounts, with confirmed meetings already locked into my personal schedule for the upcoming week. My name is Julian Vance, and I am 48 years old. If you are wondering whether I am the antagonist or the architect of rightful justice in this chronicle, I stopped caring about corporate labels the exact moment my loyalty was discarded. When the reception concluded, Gerald pulled me aside into his private office. He squeezed my shoulder once more and asked if I would personally guide Brandon through the executive transition, teach him our core operational workflows, and introduce him to our key account stakeholders. I nodded calmly, expressing my complete willingness to assist Brandon in succeeding. Gerald smiled warmly, calling me a true corporate team player. I walked back to my corner office, shut the door, and sat down in absolute stillness. There were no emotional outbursts, no raised voices, and no tears, only a crystal-clear calm washing over my consciousness. My smartphone vibrated on the desk with a message from Nolan Drake in accounting, asking what had just occurred in the boardroom. I chose not to respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and accessed an encrypted dossier that I had systematically assembled over the preceding 18 months. The dossier contained comprehensive client engagement records, campaign frameworks, and most importantly, corroborated evidence regarding our primary account, Thornton Enterprises. Thornton Enterprises represented 45% of our firm's annual recurring revenue and Gerald had been systematically falsifying campaign performance analytics and compliance metrics to maintain their contract. I had uncovered the audit discrepancies 3 months earlier and documented every altered entry as an institutional insurance policy. At 4:30 that afternoon, Brandon knocked lightly on my open door frame and stepped inside. Taking a seat across from my desk, he asked what key operational details he should digest first. I suggested we review our client roster. For the next hour, I provided high-level summary overviews containing standard metrics easily accessible from public quarterly reports. Brandon took brief notes, nodded periodically, and checked his smartphone at least 14 times during our discussion. He eventually stood up, mentioning that his father was taking him to dinner with the Thornton Enterprises team the following week, and asked if I could prepare orientation notes. I informed him with a relaxed smile that I already possessed a pre-scheduled lunch meeting with Edward Thornton, Chief Executive Officer of Thornton Enterprises, the next afternoon for a routine operational check-in. Brandon looked briefly panicked, explaining he had a golf engagement with his fraternity brothers. I offered to adjust the client's schedule so he could join at a later date, and instant relief washed over his face. After he exited my office, I sent an electronic message to Edward Thornton, confirming our lunch meeting for the following noon and mentioning that I possessed vital institutional compliance metrics that required his personal review. That night, sleep remained elusive as I stood on the balcony of my apartment 18 floors above the city streets, observing the illuminated urban grid below while contemplating professional integrity, corporate value, and the ultimate price of unchecked organizational arrogance. My brother telephoned around midnight, sensing subtle strain in my voice during an earlier call. When I detailed the boardroom gathering, Gerald's unexpected announcement, and the immediate appointment of Brandon, my brother strongly urged me to hand in my resignation immediately. He argued that at 48 years of age, with an exemplary industry reputation and 4 years of proven record growth, I could secure an executive directorship at any competing firm in the region within days. I explained to him that walking away prematurely would leave 4 years of strategic building unfinished, and that true accountability required a complete, methodical resolution. The following morning, I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a tailored navy wool suit, a crisp white shirt, and minimal accessories, embodying the precise image of an understated, seasoned corporate director. I arrived at the executive dining room 20 minutes early, where Edward Thornton was already seated at a quiet corner table. Edward was a respected executive in his late 50s who commanded absolute operational compliance and total transparency from all commercial partners. His conglomerate had maintained an exclusive service relationship with our firm for over 10 years, representing the cornerstone of our corporate stability. He greeted me warmly, praising the impressive 500% growth figures that Gerald had recently publicized in regional business publications. I thanked him politely, took my seat, and stated that institutional compliance, and metric reporting were the exact reasons I had requested our private conference. For the next 25 minutes, I presented a comprehensive analytical dossier that laid out side-by-side comparisons of the actual campaign performance figures versus the inflated, altered reports that Gerald had officially submitted to Thornton Enterprises over the previous 18 months. I placed verified system logs, internal accounting ledgers, and direct email directives on the table between us. The documented discrepancies revealed a systematic pattern of electronic misrepresentation that exposed Thornton Enterprises to severe regulatory liability and constituted clear violations of federal wire fraud statutes under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1343, as well as Securities and Exchange Commission Rule 10b-5 governing commercial misstatements. Edward's composed demeanor transformed into intense indignation as he reviewed the corroborated records line by line. He demanded to know if Gerald had deliberately deceived his board and falsified performance benchmarks for 18 consecutive months. I explained calmly that the metric manipulation commenced precisely 18 months earlier, when Gerald sought to fabricate artificial growth trajectories to justify internal restructuring and secure higher valuation metrics. Edward pointed out that such evidence provided immediate legal grounds for total contract cancellation and potential civil litigation. I took a measured sip of water and explained that I was establishing an independent, specialized entity named Advanced Strategic Partners, built entirely upon absolute fiduciary transparency, uncompromised integrity, and rigorous compliance standards. I invited Thornton Enterprises to become my founding client, offering direct, transparent executive management without institutional deception. Edward examined my documentation carefully, questioning whether I was executing a calculated corporate takeover. I responded that I was offering a clear ethical choice between a firm practicing systematic fraud and an independent partner committed to absolute honesty. I slid my new business card across the linen tablecloth, printed 2 months prior with elegant silver lettering for Advanced Strategic Partners, and requested that he evaluate the material independently without immediate pressure. Over the subsequent 5 business days, I conducted identical confidential briefings with the chief executive officers of our remaining 4 primary corporate accounts, which collectively represented another 25% of our firm's annual revenue. In each meeting, I presented corroborated evidence of metric manipulation, detailed their regulatory exposure under federal trade statutes, and outlined the operational capabilities of Advanced Strategic Partners. Meanwhile, inside our corporate headquarters, Brandon shadowed my daily routine, posing basic questions regarding campaign structures and client management strategies that I had established years earlier. I answered every inquiry with thorough, patient professionalism, demonstrating how to navigate analytics platforms, introducing him to junior staff members, and explaining core workflows. On Friday afternoon, Brandon remarked that I was handling the executive transition remarkably well, noting that his father had anticipated significant pushback or friction. I smiled warmly and replied that business execution required objective focus rather than emotional disruption, an explanation that Brandon accepted with evident relief. The following Tuesday afternoon, the scheduled executive lunch took place at Delano's, an exclusive steakhouse where Gerald routinely entertained high-value corporate accounts. Gerald ordered an expensive bottle of vintage wine, held court regarding industry trends, and presented Brandon as the vibrant new leadership designed to propel Thornton Enterprises into the next decade. Edward Thornton maintained a polite yet distant posture throughout the meal, occasionally exchanging subtle glances with me while I kept my facial expression completely neutral. As the main course was served, Gerald formally declared that Brandon would personally assume direct executive management of the Thornton account to ensure maximum corporate focus. Edward set his napkin down deliberately, cleared his throat, and interrupted Gerald to state that Thornton Enterprises was conducting an immediate formal review of its master service agreement. Gerald's confident smile remained fixed, though his eyes narrowed slightly as he offered to adjust quarterly retainer fees. Edward firmly clarified that Thornton Enterprises was not requesting a billing discount, but was executing an immediate, total termination of all commercial contracts based upon fundamental breaches of fiduciary duty and institutional integrity. The silence that settled over the dining table at Delano's was far heavier and more suffocating than the quiet inside the executive boardroom days earlier. Gerald's smile froze completely as he reminded Edward of their decade-long commercial partnership and shared history. Edward responded with cold precision, stating that commercial partnerships required fundamental honesty, pointing out that Gerald had systematically delivered altered performance metrics for 18 months. Brandon sat wide-eyed and bewildered, turning to his father to ask what Edward was alleging. Gerald's face turned pale as he attempted to brush off the allegations as a minor internal accounting miscommunication. Edward interrupted him decisively, stating that independent forensic analysis had already verified the misrepresentations and revealed that Thornton Enterprises had officially executed a multi-year master service contract with Advanced Strategic Partners effective that very morning. Edward placed his linen napkin on the table, stood up, nodded respectfully in my direction, and exited the restaurant without another word. Gerald turned toward me with intense rage, his voice trembling as he whispered an accusation of outright betrayal. I took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, looked him directly in the eyes, and repeated the exact phrase his son had used days earlier, noting that it was simply business. Before Gerald could process the catastrophic loss of 45% of his company's annual revenue, the commercial dominoes began falling at an alarming velocity. Over the next 48 hours, the chief executive officers of the remaining 4 major corporate accounts transmitted formal notices of immediate contract termination, citing audit discrepancies and misrepresentation of campaign deliverables. In total, 65% of the firm's recurring corporate revenue vanished within 2 business days. The internal financial panic was swift and unsparing. On Wednesday morning, regional financial markets reacted to rumors of the client exodus, causing the company's publicly traded shares to drop 18% in a single trading session. Gerald attempted to contact my personal phone 14 times throughout the morning. I allowed each call to transfer directly to voicemail until the 15th attempt, at which point I answered with calm composure. Gerald raged incoherently across the line before shifting to desperate bargaining, offering to name me Executive Vice President of Growth, grant substantial equity options, and assign a permanent seat on the board of directors if I returned with the client portfolio. I chuckled softly at his offer, noting that an elevated title in a collapsing corporate structure held no value. When Gerald threatened immediate legal action for client conversion, tortious interference, and breach of non-compete covenants, I reminded him that any civil litigation would instantly trigger mandatory evidentiary discovery procedures, placing our documented proof of federal wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, and securities violations under Rule 10b-5 directly into the hands of federal prosecutors. In addition, I highlighted potential non-compliance under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 of the United States Code Section 2101 should mass layoffs occur without proper statutory notice. The phone line went completely dead as the legal reality materialized in his mind. I stated calmly that choices carry inescapable consequences, then ended the call and blocked his telephone number. Over the next month, Vance Strategic Partners expanded rapidly into a premier commercial office suite that I had leased weeks earlier. Our initial growth was fueled not only by the 5 migrating enterprise accounts, but by 3 additional corporate clients who learned of our compliance-first operational model through industry channels. Recognizing the dramatic shift in executive integrity and leadership, key professionals from my former department began reaching out independently. First, Chloe Palmer, our lead analytics manager, submitted her resignation and joined my firm, followed shortly by Lyle Foster, our senior creative director. Within 6 weeks, 9 highly skilled team members from my previous division had joined Vance Strategic Partners, bringing unmatched technical expertise and total alignment with our ethical mission. Gerald attempted to initiate indirect contact through mutual industry contacts and board members, proposing financial settlements or joint public statements to restore investor confidence. I declined all indirect approaches, choosing to concentrate entirely on delivering exceptional operational results for our expanding client base. I spent long hours with our legal counsel structuring client onboarding protocols to guarantee complete transparency and regulatory alignment across every active campaign. Then, late one evening after our staff had departed, a firm knock sounded at my office door. I opened it to find Brandon standing in the dimly lit hallway. He appeared noticeably drawn, his designer suit slightly rumpled, and the arrogant posture he had displayed weeks earlier completely gone. He asked quietly if we could speak for 5 minutes. I gestured for him to take a seat across from my desk. Brandon sat down, rubbing his palms together nervously, and disclosed that his father's company was officially preparing to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization the following week, due to severe cash flow deficits. He added that federal investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission had formally opened an inquiry into executive financial disclosures, and that multiple former corporate clients were preparing civil fraud lawsuits against Gerald personally. I listened attentively without surprise, as internal financial reports from my industry network had indicated impending corporate insolvency for several weeks. I observed calmly that the sudden regulatory breakdown was the direct and unavoidable consequence of Gerald's strategic choices. Brandon looked up, meeting my eyes directly, and swore on his honor that he had been entirely ignorant of the metric falsifications when he accepted the vice presidency. I asked him candidly whether possessing that knowledge at the time would have altered his decision to accept an unearned executive position over a seasoned director with 4 years of proven performance. Brandon paused, reflected deeply, and admitted that 6 weeks earlier, his ambition, sense of entitlement, and executive privilege would have blinded him to the underlying ethical violations. He clarified that he had not come to request financial assistance, career advice, or professional absolution, but rather to acknowledge the severe injustice that had been executed against my career. He then reached inside his tailored jacket pocket and placed a sleek metallic USB drive onto my mahogany desk. He explained that the drive contained encrypted corporate accounting ledgers, detailing Gerald's off-balance sheet entities, hidden shell accounts, and systematic diversion of corporate capital over more than a decade. Brandon revealed that the documents also contain corroborated proof of historical forgery involving stock transfers executed years earlier to disenfranchise Brandon's late mother from her lawful equity holdings within the parent enterprise. Brandon explained that Gerald had forged authorized signatures and manipulated corporate governance records to secure absolute voting control, violating fundamental legal statutes regarding the dissipation of corporate assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate fraud. Furthermore, the documents revealed potential violations of elder financial exploitation laws under state regulations regarding equity seizures from aging board members who had trusted Gerald implicitly. Brandon's voice cracked slightly as he admitted that his father had spent decades exploiting colleagues and family members alike, and that he refused to inherit a corporate legacy constructed entirely upon deceit, fraud, and financial destruction. I looked at the metallic drive, asking what he expected me to accomplish with the information. Brandon replied that I was the only executive in the industry who had possessed the courage and strategic foresight to stand against Gerald's systemic corruption, leaving the ultimate decision entirely to my professional judgment. He stood up, expressed his sincere gratitude, and walked out of the suite into the night. Brandon sat across from me in silence for several minutes, watching as I carefully analyzed the structured index of the encrypted storage device. The forensic files detailed complex transactional webs involving foreign shell corporations, registered in offshore jurisdictions, systematic over-invoicing schemes, and unauthorized personal asset transfers executed over more than 12 consecutive fiscal quarters. It was a comprehensive blueprint of systematic corporate malfeasance, carefully hidden behind complex accounting maneuvers that had misled both internal auditors and external regulatory bodies. Brandon explained that discovering these hidden records had shattered his remaining illusions regarding his father's business empire. He realized that the executive status he had been offered was not a reward or a legacy, but a gilded mask designed to perpetuate an illegal enterprise. I acknowledged his courage in coming forward, emphasizing that confronting familial corruption required an extraordinary degree of moral clarity. By choosing transparency over complicity, Brandon had taken his first genuine step toward earning real professional respect. He nodded thoughtfully, noting that for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of personal integrity unburdened by his father's shadow. After Brandon departed, I sat alone in the quiet office, examining the drive in my hands for a long time. The initial satisfaction of commercial victory was tempered by a profound sense of institutional responsibility. Upon accessing the encrypted files on an isolated, non-networked laptop, the true scale of Gerald's financial misconduct was staggering. Gerald had siphoned millions of dollars through fictitious consulting contracts, manipulated federal tax reporting, and executed illegal stock transfers to consolidate personal wealth over a 12-year period. Rather than delivering the files directly to law enforcement agencies or publishing them anonymously on open forums, I contacted Grant Pierce, a senior investigative financial journalist who had been covering the firm's public decline for major business publications. I agreed to provide primary documentation on the strict condition of journalistic accuracy and thorough verification, ensuring that institutional facts were presented clearly while shielding Brandon from personal liability. As the corroborated evidence confirmed, he possessed zero involvement in the historical fraudulent schemes. The following morning, Grant Pierce published a major front-page investigative exposé detailing Gerald's decade-long corporate fraud, electronic wire violations under Title 18, Section 1343, securities misrepresentations under Rule 10b-5, and systemic dissipation of corporate assets. By noon, trading of the firm's stock was permanently halted by financial market regulatory authorities. By late afternoon, federal law enforcement agents executed a formal search warrant at corporate headquarters, escorting Gerald from the executive suite in handcuffs before television news cameras. I watched the live broadcast from my corner office, sipping a quiet coffee with a sense of solemn closure rather than malicious celebration. 3 days later, Brandon visited my office one final time to express his sincere gratitude for protecting his personal reputation in the published report. He shared his firm intention to relocate to another state, discard his unearned executive titles, and learn the industry from the ground up at an entry-level position in a regional marketing firm. I commended his resolve, wished him genuine professional success, and noted that true leadership is forged through earned competence rather than unearned birthright. As he departed, I felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that the truth had finally been brought into the light. Following Gerald's public indictment and arrest, the broader commercial market consequences unfolded over several months across the industry. Gerald's former firm was completely liquidated through federal bankruptcy court proceedings, its remaining physical assets and intellectual property acquired for pennies on the dollar by a regional competitor, while former executive staff members scattered across the industry. 6 months after founding Vance Strategic Partners, our rapid client acquisition and expanded campaign workloads necessitated a move to a state-of-the-art office facility, occupying an entire commercial floor in the financial district. Within 1 year, our independent firm was managing enterprise client portfolios twice the size of my former employer's peak accounts, supported by a dedicated staff of over 50 industry professionals. On the exact second anniversary of that boardroom celebration, where I had been publicly dismissed and replaced, an unmarked envelope arrived at my desk. Inside was a legal news clipping announcing Gerald's criminal conviction and sentencing to 12 years in a federal penitentiary for federal wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, securities fraud under Rule 10b-5, and felony tax evasion. Handwritten at the bottom of the news clipping was a single sentence stating that unearned power built on deception inevitably crumbles into dust. Whether the note originated from Brandon or another former industry colleague was immaterial. The underlying ethical principle remained absolute and unshakable. Over the next 18 months, Vance Strategic Partners established itself as the premier benchmark for ethical corporate management, serving major enterprise accounts nationwide with complete transparency and uncompromised compliance standards. Our internal team continued to innovate, expanding our analytical forecasting tools and attracting exceptional talent from across the corporate landscape. We cultivated an organizational culture rooted in mutual respect, clear executive accountability, and rigorous data integrity, ensuring that no team member's contributions were ever minimized or overlooked. Former colleagues who had joined us during our initial transition rose to executive directorships within our firm, leading newly established divisions that pushed our market share to unprecedented levels across North America. Corporate clients frequently cited our complete transparency, verified reporting protocols, and unwavering ethical standards as the primary justification for their long-term loyalty and ongoing account expansion. Furthermore, we established a formal executive mentorship framework to guide emerging industry talent, prioritizing merit, technical mastery, and professional character over personal connections or corporate privilege. This initiative attracted national recognition, positioning Vance Strategic Partners as a beacon of progressive enterprise leadership. Reflecting upon the long path from that initial boardroom betrayal to our current global standing, I realized that true victory was never about causing financial ruin to Gerald or witnessing his public downfall. Rather, true victory was defined by our firm's unwavering commitment to build something clean, enduring, and mathematically unassailable from the ground up. In an industry often compromised by short-term greed and executive vanity, Vance Strategic Partners proved that rigorous legal compliance, radical transparency, and deep respect for human talent are not merely ethical ideals, but the most potent drivers of sustainable commercial growth. Our journey demonstrated to the entire corporate sector that meritocracy and integrity will ultimately triumph over institutional nepotism and fraudulent shortcuts. Every milestone achieved by our team stands as a testament to the power of methodical perseverance when aligned with absolute truth. Last month, Vance Strategic Partners reached a monumental milestone when our firm was officially acquired by one of the premier international marketing and consulting conglomerates in North America. The acquisition terms guaranteed complete operational autonomy for Vance Strategic Partners as a standalone subsidiary, retained our entire executive and technical staff, and granted me a permanent seat on the global board of directors. The national press release highlighted our unprecedented multi-year growth rate, our unblemished compliance record, and our industry-leading client retention statistics. Standing in our new executive boardroom during the acquisition announcement, looking out over the panoramic city skyline, the full arc of the journey became crystal clear. From the initial sting of corporate nepotism and executive betrayal to the methodical assembly of an unassailable commercial enterprise, every single step had been guided by legal precision, ethical strength, and unwavering perseverance. The fundamental lesson embedded within this journey is vital for every executive, manager, and working professional. Corporate titles, corner offices, and temporary organizational authority can easily be granted by executive decree, but true authority, genuine client trust, and professional mastery can only be earned through uncompromised integrity and sustained effort. When confronted with institutional injustice, workplace betrayal, or corporate greed, the most effective and enduring response is never reckless retaliation or emotional conflict, but the deliberate legal construction of a superior legacy that completely outshines and outlasts those who attempted to diminish your worth. Building an unassailable career upon truth, legal compliance, and excellence remains the ultimate form of professional victory. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this chronicle of resilience, legal accountability, and professional triumph.